Hi everybody, Nicole here from Hair of the Dog, and I just wanted to give you a couple quick tips for shooting in snow. And the first one is shooting in falling snow can be pretty challenging. I don't know if you've tried it before, but when the snow's falling, especially if it's falling hard, your camera's going to want to try to pull focus on the snow, and sometimes it's hard to get focus on the dog. I use back button focus, but it really doesn't matter what types of focusing you're using. Your camera is naturally going to want to try to grab focus on some of that falling snow on occasion. So really, the way to get around that is just keep shooting. You're going to have a lot more out of focus shots than you usually would if you're shooting in the falling snow. But for the ones that catch, I think it's totally worth it. So just be a little bit patient and keep trying. And it's important maybe to just keep trying your focus here and there. And sometimes it's going to miss and sometimes it's going to catch. But that's just the name of the game when shooting in snow. Now, some random other thoughts for gear when shooting in snow. If it's snowing really, really heavy and fast, you're going to want to keep an eye on your gear and protect your gear because after all, snow is water. And while professional level gear is weather sealed, you still just want to keep an eye on it. Don't forget your batteries are going to drain incredibly fast in the snow too. If you have extra batteries, you might want to keep them against your person in a pocket like inside your coat to try to keep them nice and warm because you will go through batteries quickly. Usually when I would shoot in Pittsburgh in the snow, I would be fine with one battery for the whole session, but I would make sure that it is charged before I left for that session, and I would bring a backup just in case. But that's something to keep in mind. And then don't forget to keep your hands warm too. I know a lot of people like fingerless gloves. I'm a wuss and my hands still get too cold using fingerless gloves. So I actually prefer like glove liners, like really thin gloves, because then I can still work my controls and my hands stay warmer. If it was really cold, I would probably use the glove liners and fingerless gloves. Yeah, I don't like the cold. That's why I moved to North Carolina. But anyway, back to snow shooting. One other thing to keep in mind when you're shooting in the snow too is oftentimes the snow is so gorgeous when it's falling. That can be challenging, but it is fun. It's worthwhile, I think. The other time that it's gorgeous is right after it snows and you have all of the white snow sitting on the branches behind you and behind your subject. It just makes it absolutely beautiful. The challenge of shooting in snow comes when the snow's fallen and maybe it started to melt a little bit and you have snow on the ground, but all the trees are now bare and all the snow's fallen off the trees. So then when you look at your scene, you have very disproportionate like keys. Essentially, you have a low key background of these dark trees without any snow on top of them. And then you have this really high key foreground and the ground. So it's often hard to make snow scenes like that look the way you're expecting them to look, and that's often the reason. So that's just something to keep in mind. I usually, if it's still snowy, maybe try to find some evergreens or some area like that that might be a little bit lighter, but I really love to try to get out there when there's still snow falling or snow sitting on the trees. It makes a world of difference. Now, something to keep in mind for post-processing when you get your snow shoots in, a lot of times when I see people edit snow images, two things. They aren't bright enough, that the snow is like underexposed, like this. This is how, straight out of camera right here, my snow is a bit underexposed. And you look at it, you're like, oh, okay, well, it's all right. But wait till we finish it and you'll see the big difference. And the other thing I see a lot is blue snow, especially if you have some area that's kind of in light and then you have some areas in shade, you're going to get blue in those shadows. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a really easy fix here in Lightroom to remove the blue. I'll show you in just a second. And then in Photoshop, you can remove the blue on hue, saturation, luminance adjustment layer, and then you can just paint on the areas you want to remove it from. In Lightroom, if you're removing the blue, oftentimes if you're using the hue, saturation, luminance panel right down here, then you're removing blue from the whole scene. So you can see there's a lot of blue in it right now just because the white balance is not set yet, but we'll get to that. But that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's get down to editing this image. Now, you look at it and you're like, oh wait, that white balance doesn't look too bad. And that's a trick our mind plays too. Whenever you guys are looking at your images, especially when you're learning to see color, you might want to edit your image, walk away for a while, and come back and look at it. And they're going to be like, wait, that's kind of blue. Or, oh, that's pretty yellow. I didn't notice that. Because our eyes adjust and our brain knows what this should look like. And so our brain says, oh, no, you're not actually seeing that. You're seeing this. because our minds are smart and we don't really know how they work. But anyway, you want to test that out or double check that, especially at the beginning. But we're going to warm this up because it looks pretty cool to me. So already right here, I'm like, all right, this is looking better. I like that right about there. And I'm usually going to eyeball it. Honestly, usually I'm going to grab my Expo disc and custom white balance on location. But this was just in my front yard when I still lived in Pittsburgh last winter. Never edited this image yet. It's a year later. But I just grabbed my camera. I didn't grab my Expo disc. So hence I have to edit manually. So I like that. It's about 8,700. The other thing you can do, remember, snow is white. So as long as you're not clicking on an overexposed piece of snow, ooh, that's another important note. Don't overexpose your snow. Usually for exposing a scene, I will bring that snow pretty bright. And that's really how I expose, because I can pull up the shadows on the dog. I can pull up the exposure a bit on the dog, but I can't bring back blown highlights. So make sure you don't blow out the snow. All right, so let's click here because that should be white. Oh, and that was pretty darn good. You can see my temperature is 9,300 and then +7. So this little adjustment brush right here, you can do this and you can be like, you're supposed to pick a neutral target. This gray is pretty neutral too. So it will, oh, that makes it more blue. But anytime you have true black or true white in your image, you can use that to pretty quickly and easily get really, really close with your white balance. That's another reason you like to use a gray card maybe, which is what I prefer, just because there's not always a neutral target in my image. And even if you have a white dog, their fur might be like whitish yellow. It might not be truly white or truly neutral. So if you don't use an Expo disc, I highly recommend a gray card. It will save you hours of time in post-processing and much stress. Save you much stress, I should say. Anyway, so that looks pretty good. So now we need to brighten this up. I'm going to pull up my exposure just a touch. Might be a little too much. And then I'm going to pull my highlights up, my whites up. And then I'm going to pull, and I have to keep an eye down here on these shadows. Or on my snow. If I take my little cursor down here, see there's a little, what's that called? Magnifying glass. And then right up here in my histogram, look under this histogram, it tells you. So anytime you're getting those RGB values at 100, it's blown out. So none of this is blown out. I'm okay here. So that's good. And then I'm going to pull my blacks down a touch just because I want to add a little contrast back in there. When I pull those whites and those highlights up, then I just kind of lost all the contrast in the image. Those whites are actually a little bit too bright. And those highlights. I bring the highlights back down. Yeah, so if my highlights drop, you can see I lose the detail on the snow. But if I pull those back down, I get some of those details back in the snow. You don't want to pull it down too far. And I'll pull that up a little bit. I might actually pull shadows up. Sometimes I do find that I like to work my whites and highlights opposite of each other, and same thing with my shadows and blacks. I will often pull down highlights, pull up whites, pull up shadows, and pull down blacks. I am going to add a touch of vibrance here, just to add a little bit more color to Zoe. And I'm going to bump up the clarity. I love adding clarity in snow images. I usually don't go above 20. That starts to get a little bit too much, but I love it right around there. So honestly, that's really all I would do here. Now we can go down here. You know, I can adjust the point curve a little bit, put on some medium contrast and see. I actually don't mind that. If you want to see what it does before and after, you can click this little box right up here to turn on and off those tone curve adjustments. Oh, it's a little much. It's a little much. But I do maybe want a little bit more contrast. So we're going to go back to linear, and I'm just going to do that myself. I'm going to pull those darks down, pull those shadows up, pull those lights up. There we go. I'm going to leave it just like that. I might pull those highlights down. Okay, and then I'll brighten her eyes in Photoshop. All right, so I think that's pretty good. Okay, here's our before and after. You can see that final image. It's light, it's bright, the color's right, the snow is white. There's not a lot of blue in there. Then, of course, I would jump over in Photoshop. I'd brighten up her eyes. I can link to how I do eyes underneath this video, so you can check that out in another video. And then I would remove my daughter's hand and that leash. I hope this helps you get out there, enjoy the snow. It is beautiful when it snows, and it is really fun to photograph in. And I hope this gave you a couple great tips.